Hey book besties, my name is Erica and welcome back to my little bookish corner. We're here to do our January reading wrap up. I read technically 11 books, one of them a soft DNF, so we'll say 10 books and a soft DNF. Let's get into it. 5 books I did on the Kindle Unlimited / audio. We'll start with those first. The first one I read at the very beginning of this year was All the Little Raindrops by Mia Sheridan. If you read Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman and you're a big thriller gal, you will love this book. I personally liked it more than Jennifer Hartman's, although Jennifer Hartman's was phenomenal. I am not a person who has to have romance or spice of any kind in a book. It's nice if it's there, but I'm not mad if it's not. And I just felt like the thriller aspect and the trauma aspect was just so much more on point in All the Little Raindrops. With that said, though, both of them were good. But I just say, if you've read Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman and you liked it, then you will love All the Little Raindrops by Mia Sheridan. The next book I read was Things We Lost in the Fire by Mariana Enriquez. This was a collection of stories set in Argentina. And little backstory about Mariana, she grew up in Argentina during the Dirty War, which was like in 1973 through 1983, 84. And during this time period, the military, the armed forces, death squads were rounding up anyone that was considered to be a political dissident or against like the right-wing movement at the time. And over 10,000 people disappeared during this time. The methods they used were nothing short of unaliving, torture, rape, repression, violent acts. It was a very ugly time. And so a lot of these stories were kind of inspired or during this movement or at the end of this movement. But they very much read like Argentina campfire stories or like the equivalent to the stories that we would tell here in America around like a campfire, but maybe ours don't have as much political backing. I thought it was very good. I enjoyed a lot of the stories. Some of them were kind of weird, but you know, it did say that in the description because they're like supernatural, touching on supernatural. But yeah, I enjoyed that. The next book I read, for the sake of I don't want to get flagged for any reason, we're going to call it The Untouched Unalivers by Jeffrey Eugenides. There is a movie for this book. I saw bits and pieces of the movie growing up, and I've never seen it in its entirety. But I wanted to read the book. It was one of my 25 for 25, as well as Things We Lost in the Fire. This book is proof of not liking a book does not mean that the book was not good, if that makes sense. The book was, for what it was and the way that he was writing it and his intention of writing it, was beautifully done. I did find myself rather enraged the way that these girls were spoken about, but I had to remember that he was writing from the POV of like middle school, teenage age boys, especially in like the 70s. There was a lot of terminology and a lot of things that kind of rubbed me wrong, like the use of this word. Obviously today we've not used that word in reference to a child in the book that had Down syndrome. And then, you know, it kind of infuriated me because it didn't matter like what these girls were going through. It didn't matter what was happening to these girls. All the boys cared about was that the girls didn't notice them or love them back or notice their efforts or whatever. It was about them, not about whatever it was that was happening to these girls to cause themselves to unalive. So yes, the book was beautifully written. I just, you know. The next book I read was another one from my 25 for 25. I was hitting them out right out the gate, starting out. I was also in kind of nothing was really itching my brain enough. And so I switched over to some literary fiction, but it was Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This was a collection of stories about obviously women and their bodies and the violence that is visited upon us or women within their lifetimes. It was another collection of stories. Some of them bordered on paranormal. Did I feel like at times this book was literally over my head? Yes, I did. Did I enjoy it? Yes, I did. Even though I didn't understand all of it. But that's how we learn. That's how we grow as readers, is reading things kind of, you know, it called me to use a lot of dictionary and thesaurus trying to figure out what she was saying. And some of the stories were very straightforward. You know, there were stories with body image and there were stories with grape and essay, and there were stories about the one of them was heavily inspired by the story with the women with the ribbon around their necks, and if you remove the ribbon, their necks fall off or their heads fall off. But it was about doing all these things for men and just kind of always being invisible to them. It was just kind of moving, even though some of it was just very deep. But yes, I enjoyed it. It's definitely not a book that I would recommend to everyone because of the level of literary know-how, I guess, or just the fact that it might not be as easily digested as, say, a fantasy book would be. So I did enjoy it. It was good. If you're into like some feminine rage books, that's definitely one I would add to your TBR. The last book that I read on my Kindle and with the audio, or my e-readers with the audio, was actually a part of a series that I started. I read the first one. I do have a physical copy. I just don't have a physical copy of this one yet. I started the Zodiac Academy in 2024. I read the first 3 books, and I'm doing like a specific reading order that was recommended by a fellow book talker. And the way that she had it, you're supposed to read the first 3 books of the Zodiac Academy. Then you're supposed to jump over to the Boys of Zodiac. And so I finally started that. So first I read, obviously, Dark Fae. This is the first book in the Boys of Zodiac. And then I read Savage Fae. I will never make an exception for douche canoe males more than in these books. The way that they write them, they do it in such a like lovable, likable way. When in reality, if I ever came across never in real life would I tolerate, acknowledge, ever. But she does a really great job. This follows Elise Castillo as she enrolls into a academy, and she's kind of going there with the purpose of like vengeance for something that has happened. She's going as like an undercover PI. She's trying to figure out what happened. So she goes to Aurora Academy to find the kings, and there are 4 of them. So this is a wide choose. So if that's up your alley, although I will say it doesn't get very wide choosy in this book. It definitely gets more wide choosy in Savage Fae. But I gobbled these up. If you like Zodiac Academy, you will love these books. They're fabulous. They're written the same kind of like, I would say smutty reading, but not in the sense that every page was smut. I say smutty in the sense that this book is not going to win a Pulitzer. You know, these books are not going to win a Pulitzer. Are they well-written books? No, that's a very arguable point. Are they bingeable books? Yes. Are they books if you're solely there for entertainment purposes? Yes. These are the books for that. And so if you can turn off that side of your brain intellectually and not think too deep into them, you're good. I struggle with that personally, but I have been eating this series up. When I read the Zodiac Academy, the first 3 books, I literally read them each in a day. I did not read these in a day. I've had a lot going on. Then I read the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series. This is Beneath a Sugar Sky. This is a book series. There's 9 books. They're technically each a standalone novel. You don't have to read them in order to read the books. I'm obviously reading them in order, but this is about children who kind of fall through these doorways into different worlds. And these worlds can be anything from like horror worlds with vampires and werewolves to nonsense worlds where everything's made out of candy and literally nothing makes sense, to super literal worlds. There's all these different worlds that these kids end up in, and time moves very differently there. They can be there for days or weeks or months or years, but they somehow end up back in their world, the real world, and their parents don't really know what to do with them, and so they go to this home for wayward children. And each book so far has followed a different child. This one followed a girl that came back from a world where she was like a fish, a dolphin, and kind of navigating being back in the world. These are very short reads, 174 pages, not very long reads at all. I've enjoyed them. They are fantasy, but I almost want to call them literary fantasy because the way that she writes them, she's writing them in a way where she has like this impeccable ability of writing about like the human heart or the human condition or feelings, trauma, you know, and she does it in a way that's just, it's not over your head where you can tell that I'm not reading a fantasy book. It's still very much a fantasy book, but I don't know. It's like fantasy with a brain. I don't know if that made any sense. Probably not, but I have a hard time reviewing these books because they're like nothing I've ever read before. but I do enjoy them, and I have continued on with the series. Then I went on to starting, I've had this book on my shelf for a while, and everyone raves about the series, and I'm a person that when it's really, really big and hype, I will wait for some of the hype to die down if I've not been into it already, and then read it so that I can read it without hearing about it. So for a few months, this book was everywhere on my feed, and that is The Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is fantasy, sci-fi at its core. This is what I started reading in middle school and high school. I absolutely adored this. There was no smut. There was no spice. None of that was necessary for it to be a phenomenal book. This was so good. So good. This book will rip your heart out in the first few chapters. But the world building in this book is just phenomenal. The story in this book is just phenomenal. I don't want to say too much more than that because I really just want you to go read it. But it basically follows Darrow, who is a red in a color cast society set in the future. He lives on planet Mars, and he's like the lowest of the totem pole, basically a slave. And then kind of following his story and what happens to him. It is so good. I cannot wait to start Golden Sun, which is book 2. But I had to put it on pause because I'm doing a reread book club for the new Hunger Games book that's coming out. And in February, that will be like the forefront of my reading. So we will loop back to this later, and I'm super excited about it because this was so good. As you know, or if you didn't know, or if you're into it, you're not into it, Onyx Storm, the 3rd book in the, what is the word for it? It's not called the Fourth Wing series. It's called the something series, and I can't think of it. Anyways, Fourth Wing came out this month, and I was super excited. I read Fourth Wing in like October finally, and I read Iron Flame right after it. I devoured them. And so getting ready for Onyx Storm, I wasn't going to, but I decided to go ahead and do a reread when I started seeing everyone's like series, and I was like, wait, where did you get that? So I reread Fourth Wing, and I reread Iron Flame. I adored these the first time I read them, and I didn't dislike them the second time I read them, but I definitely was like, I get what people mean when they give it negative reviews. Is it the strongest fantasy writing I've ever read in my life? No, it's not. And I am going to give a hot take here. The spice was so lackluster that I didn't remember it. So much so that when I went to the midnight release party and there was a question on the quiz for where did Xaden feast? Yes, that was the word they used. Feast on Violet, I got it wrong because that is how much I did not care about those moments in the book like everyone else. Everyone raves about Zaddy. I liked his character without the spice, so you know, there's that. So I read these, Fourth Wing, Iron Flame. This one's my favorite because I've liked being newly introduced to the whole magic system and the world building and the dragon system and the choosing of the writers and all the other stuff. So it was very entertaining. Whereas in this one, there wasn't as much as that. And that was already established. And we were starting to get back into a plot. Not my favorite. So I went to the midnight release for Onyx Storm.
I really want to know more about Imogen's signet too, because I feel like her whole memory life.
Is this going to hold?
What if it's right out the beginning? That would suck.
Should we read the first? Should we just sit here and read?
Super pumped. Super pumped. I went with my friend Mercedes. We had a great time. So excited. I also, snow apocalypse happened here where I live. And we're not used to snow in this area. So we were all home for a few days. So I was able to read the book. I softy enough this book. At chapter 54. I have literally less than 60 pages left. And I have just not picked it up again. I plan to. But I just got... I don't know how to say this without making it seem like I hated the book. I didn't hate the book. I just felt like there was a lot happening. The pacing was all over the place. I feel like she's about to info dump the ever-loving bejesus out of me in the last 50 pages and still leave me with more questions than answers. And that is not my favorite thing in the world. She does not do that as well as SJM does. SJM will take the last 100 pages of a book and completely change the entire story in a phenomenal way in comparison to this. And if that's just my take, and I know she big on cliffhangers. Fourth Wing's cliffhanger wasn't as traumatic as Iron Flames was, obviously. So I know that it's getting there. But I don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it, what it is that I'm just not loving about this book. But I'm gonna finish it. My friend's about to like lose her mind if I don't finish this book so we can talk about it. I plan to finish it. I just haven't had time because I had started and I filmed me through the entire time reading it so that I could do like a reactions video through the book. And so I want to finish it, recording it, and I just have not had time to like devote to setting that up and reading it, all the other stuff. But yeah, That's it. That was my January. That was the weirdest way to say January. That was my January reading wrap up. We're off to a great start in 2025. I hope y'all had a great reading month and a good reading month ahead. Bye.